Hello, and thank you so much for having me back virtually, unfortunately, next year in person again. I promise you that. My name is Jan Freitag, Senior Vice President with STR. If you haven't seen this presentation before, well, I'm going to talk about data. We have about 20 minutes or so, and I want to give you the state of the union for the US hotel industry, then jump into Washington and talk about the Central Business District in a little bit more detail. Let me thank Elliot Ferguson, all the staff from Destination DC, and of course, Kate for your hand-holding through this process, as always. So let's jump right in. I want to share with you today, as I said, we'll talk about the US first and then dig into your specific areas in a little bit more detail. Before we start, please continue to do what you've been doing. Wear your mask. It's the cool thing to do. So please tell yourself and your guests, wear a mask in public. The United States lodging industry got hit and got hit hard. What I'm showing you here is the RevPAR percent change by month back to the beginning of the year, but really let's talk about April. The single worst RevPAR decline months we have ever recorded ever in our 30-year history. You're seeing, luckily, that the data is now getting, I guess, less bad, for the lack of a better term. Minus 52% RevPAR decline last month. We fully expect that things are going to get a little bit better, but of course, Labor Day looms large when vacationers are no longer, on the road and they're home, even though school is virtual, but people will probably be staying closer to home. It's going to be interesting to see, with really no corporate demand and zero group demand, what's going to happen to the US hotel industry into the fall and then into the winter. But so far, so not great, but not as bad as it was. What I'm showing you here then is the weekly data. We're overlaying the percent change in RevPAR with the number of new COVID cases, according to ourworldindata.org. And what you're seeing are a couple of things. Number one is, as I said, April was the single worst month. Actually, the week of April the 11th was the single worst week we had ever recorded, where RevPAR declined almost 84%. That is much worse than it was post 9/11. Is much worse than it was in 2008 and 9. I mean, we don't have data back to the Depression, but I guess that's sort of data that we saw back then. The good news is that, of course, you see that the RevPAR week-over-week data is now getting better and better and better until last week. So for the week ending August the 22nd, RevPAR declined 46.1%. The week prior, the week ending August 15th, unfortunately, was exactly the same number, minus 46.1%, implying that RevPAR percent changes have stalled. Now that's just one data point, and of course, as you know, one data point does not a trend make. But the question is, is this the beginning of a trend? Are we going to see a stalling out of RevPAR percent changes, even though the number of new COVID cases continues to decrease? Last week at new cases at plus 310,000, which is way off the prior peak of 476,000. But still, 300,000 new cases a week means that basically within a month, we have 1 million new cases. So it's going to be interesting to track that and to see if RevPAR percent changes are going to get better going forward. What I'm overlaying here then is not RevPAR, but actually just room demand, right? Just to say how many rooms did we sell? And I'm adding to that a new metric that is actually not our metric, it's the government's metric, the TSA checkpoint data that they actually make available on tsa.gov. Super, super interesting stuff for data guys. What I'm showing you here is that yes, week of April the 11th, we sold the fewest number of rooms ever recorded ever in 1 week, 7 million. Now, the interesting thing is that the week of April the 11th, when the American economy was basically shut down and nobody was traveling, we sold 1 million room nights. Oh, I think that's sort of interesting to note, that's sort of our floor, right? We always sell 1 million rooms a night. Fast forward to last week, we sold just under 18 million room nights, and you saw that 5 million people were checked in through American airports. What's interesting to note here is the ratio. When you look at a normal week, quote unquote, the week of March the 7th, you see that the ratio is roughly 61%. So you can explain sort of 6 out of 10 rooms that were booked in hotels with people flying. That's of course not 100% correct, but you sort of see where I'm going with this, right? The more people fly, the more hotel rooms we sell. That ratio has completely collapsed. If you look on the far right-hand side, you see that the ratio is now 28%. What does that mean? It means that drive-to markets have been doing really, really well, right? Because room demand continues to increase. And if people aren't flying, they got to get there somehow. How do they do it? Obviously, they're driving. And that's exactly what we've seen up and down the East Coast, up and down the West Coast. State and national parks have done really, really well with drive-to traffic. What's worth noting, though, is that that 17.8 million number of rooms sold last week, the week ending August the 22nd, is indeed lower than it was in the prior week by roughly 500,000 rooms, 491,000 rooms to be exact. So we sold 500,000 rooms less last week than in the prior week. And when we're looking at this on a week-by-week percent change, you see a very clear pattern emerge. So this does not track percent change in demand from the same week last year, which is what we normally do at STR, but this looks at week-over-week percent changes. And you're seeing that, starting in the week of April the 11th, the trough, all the way through the week of basically July the 4th, room demand increased roughly 8% or so. So it's pretty healthy growth. That growth has way slowed. And last week, for the first time since April the 11th, we actually saw a decline in room demand. And we're a little worried that that might be a sign of things to come. Again, one data point does not a trend make, but we're paying very close attention. And then let me finish up the national overview with our forecast. You see that we're projecting that this year our occupancy comes in at sub 40%, 6 out of 10 rooms empty, and that next year we're barely filling half the rooms. That ADR is dropping from 131 down to 103, and then comes up a little bit, and that RevPAR is basically at 2010 levels. So within 2 years, we're wiping out a decade of RevPAR growth, and RevPAR is now 34% below what it was. RevPAR is expected to be 34% last year, lower than it was in 2019. Let's jump into DC. If you're a subscriber to STR, thank you. And this is very familiar. I'm just showing you here what the metro area looks like versus where the CBD is, right in the middle there, just to give you a sense of the submarkets and the markets that we're looking at. And unfortunately, the monthly RevPAR percent change is actually worse than it is for the nation. So in the month of April, RevPAR declined 88%, and now in July, it is just barely better than 70%. So yeah, things are getting better, but man, it's just going to take us quite a while to get back to quote unquote normal. And then the occupancy, if you translate the RevPAR percent change as a function of occupancy percent change and room rate percent change, the occupancies are very, very low. Yeah, we used to sell 20%, now we're selling over 30%, but still, those are very, very, very tough numbers. When you're looking at the occupancy, though, what you have to keep in mind is that we are taking the rooms that are open and doing the calculation based on those. And we've gotten a lot of clients ask us, hey, can you just show us what happens when we assume all rooms are open? And of course we can. And this is called TRI, Total Room Inventory Methodology. And what you're seeing here is that the standard occupancy for July, 35.6%, is when you take all rooms into consideration, of course, the denominator goes up, so the occupancy is way lower. The difference is actually 16.7%. And mathematically, what that means is that percent difference has to be mathematically the number of rooms that are temporarily closed. So in the greater metro market, 17% of rooms are currently out of inventory. Looking at this then within the broader context of the top 25 markets, what you're seeing is that, well, there are a lot of markets that have lower occupancies, but there are a lot of markets that have higher occupancies. 20 markets in the top 25 markets have an occupancy of between 30 and 50%. You're seeing that for Washington, we call that 36% or so. Oahu, because of travel restrictions and the quarantines, actually has much lower occupancy. And Norfolk is the winner in this scenario and has, because of the strong demand from the military, their occupancies continues to be way over 50%. when we're looking at this on an ADR perspective, an interesting picture emerges. So Oahu, which has the lowest occupancy, but the people who are going there are still paying very high rates. So the ADR in Oahu is actually $150. And you see that the DC number right around 100 is basically right sort of middle of the road here, with Houston being, you know, $71. Actually, 2 weeks ago, there was exactly a $100 delta between Houston and Oahu. That delta has shrunk a little bit, which means that ADRs continue to compress. The segmentation data for the metro market is, yeah, it's not good. There are no groups, right? So group occupancy down 87%, RevPAR down 85%. Room rate, yeah, went up a little bit, but the actual group occupancy is like 3%. So there is really no group to speak of. And you're seeing that on the transient side, data is a little bit better, but the RevPAR is down 73% as well. The pipeline data that we're looking at is showing that, yes, there is still activity. So for the metro market, there are, you know, a bunch of thousands of hotels under construction. We fully expect that the projects that are in construction today will open, because it's in everybody's best interest. The owner, the developer, the bank, the lender, the construction company, they all want these to open. But it is very, very, very likely that after those projects open, the projects that are in final planning will not backfill the in construction pipeline. So we will see a slow but steady decrease in the number of rooms in construction. And that, of course, is good news from a competitive perspective, right? You won't see a whole lot of new competitors coming online over the next couple of years. But what is also true, is true for the nation, is true for Washington, is that, and we had this slide, we used to call it, we're not building ballrooms anymore. There's not a lot of upper upscale activity. And if you believe in the hotel industry, which we do, which you do, and if you believe there will be more groups coming in 2022 and onward, what that implies then is, where are those people going to meet? If we're not building new ballrooms, they have to stay and meet in properties, in the existing properties, you know, the existing upper upscale and luxury properties, which are all getting older. So interesting sort of interplay, interesting interaction between the pipeline and what the competitive landscape is going to look like 3, 4, 5 years out. Lastly, let's dive into the CBD data. And well, the monthly RevPAR percentage change data is worse than it is for the market, which is worse than it is for the nation. So RevPAR was down in April by 94%. There basically was no demand, and it is now down minus 81%. So there really isn't any room demand still. I mean, there is no group demand, let's put it that way. Of course, there's always government demand. Of course, there's always some corporate transient. There might be some leisure in there, but of course, a lot of things are closed. So what this means is that it's going to be a very, very long road to recovery. You know, in order for this data to change meaningfully, we need groups to come back. The occupancies were, well, non-existent, you know, almost only 11% occupancy in April of the rooms that were open, and we're now just down to, you know, call that, you know, 24%, 25%, 1 in 4 rooms or so occupied. Again, this is clearly a function of the lack of corporate transient and corporate group demand. The next couple of charts are new. I don't think I've shown these to you. We call them spaghetti charts, for the lack of a better term. I don't know if that's a technical term, that's what we call them within STR. And what we're showing you here is just all the submarkets overlaid. And we're starting out with, of course, with room demand. And interesting to see that actually the CBD has higher room demand, you know, sells more rooms than all the other submarkets. But of course, there are more rooms in the CBD, hence the occupancies are a little bit lower. So what you're seeing here then is the weekly occupancy. The CBD lags despite the demand increase. And you're actually seeing in August that the occupancies are actually taking a dip. And if you remember a slide ago, room demand continued to increase sort of nicely. The answer to that, of course, is that more hotels are open. right? There were a bunch of hotels that were closed, and every week owners make the decision, you know what, we are now ready to open, bring people back in, and we think we can make money, you know, at this very low occupancy. So it's going to be interesting to see how that moves going forward. On the room rate side, not a big surprise, I don't think, but the CBD leads all the other submarkets. You know, the lowest one is I-95 Fredericksburg, and you're seeing here Arlington is the second one with $113. The CBD continues to have high room rates, and what's nice to see here is that even like at the beginning of June or so, there was this nice uptick, and $131 certainly, I think, gives you hope that there is some pricing power going forward. And then unfortunately, you take the occupancy, take the ADR, put it together, it gets you RevPAR, and we've sort of blanked out all the other submarkets just to make the point, oh wow, the CBD RevPAR is much lower than it is in the other areas because their occupancies are just much more pronounced. And of course, you compare that to the beginning of March. Well, actually, I don't think you want to compare it to the beginning of March. But then RevPAR was $181. So then Kate asked me to look at the forecast that was published by Tourism Economics together with Destination DC. And the point here is just to say, oh, wow, you know, what we see for the nation is the same as what we see for the CBD. Very, very low occupancies this year, but only half the rooms are filled next year, which means it's really hard to drive rate in this environment. So room rates are going from 226 down to 183, back up to just under 200, but that's still way below the 226 that it was. And the RevPAR percent change, you know, call it minus 40 when you compare 2021 to 2019. So the question is, what does the recovery look like? Some of you may have been familiar with the swoosh metaphor that the Wall Street Journal published. I listened to a podcast about commercial mortgage-backed securities. Yes, that does exist. And they were talking about the inverse square root. So you drop sharp and you come up a little and then it sort of evens out. So I think we're basically on this half V. The question is, where are we going forward? You know, what does that, is there going to be a full V recovery, which we don't think so, but sort of more, it's like the combination of the Nike swoosh and the inverted square root, like a sharp fall off and then a slow and steady increase, you know, all the way back to, all the way forward, probably into 2025. You know, for the nation, we're suggesting that room demand is going to get back to 2019 levels at around 2023 or so, but that because ADRs were cut or dropped so much, that it's going to take us to 2025 until RevPAR is going to be back at 2019 levels. One thing I think that other countries are doing much better than what we're doing in the United States is, you know, wearing masks. And what you're seeing here, unfortunately, on the far right-hand side, this is from our favorite website, not favorite website, but from a website called TMZ. You know, here's why the coronavirus is out of control. And this is actually from Nashville, where I'm based, and they're calling us No Maskville. Terrible name, but true, right? I mean, can you spot the difference? You see on the left-hand side in China, in APAC, you know, you see on the right-hand side that people aren't taking us quite as seriously. And I think that then obviously leads to spikes in the data, which is why I put on LinkedIn, you know, and 11,000 people looked at it and 250 liked it. You know, masks are the paycheck protection program for our industry. So please mask up when you go out. Hide your smile for a while is what the Hatch Show print says, which I bought here at the Country Music Hall of Fame. I'm happy to take any questions at my email, jan@str.com. I thank you so much for your time. I wish you well. I wish you health. And I wish that we see each other in person next year. Thank you so much.